Hello everyone, and welcome to Snowbound 2, Electric Boogaloo! Remember in March when I posted a 2-hour-long video in which I reviewed every book I was able to find for free that had the word Snowbound in the title? And I had just gotten to the end of the project and was feeling so excited and victorious that I'd gotten through all those books, and I was just about to post when I decided to double check something real quick, and I suddenly realized there were about a dozen books I had missed. You have no idea how disappointed I was. I tried to get over it and say, okay, so I missed a few books, I still read a lot. And I tried to move on, but I just couldn't do it. Every time I have tried to pick a new book to read, and I have read a couple things since then, but every time I have felt this sense of guilt. And the lack of completion when I was so close has bothered me so much that a couple weeks ago I finally said, ugh, for crying out loud, we're just gonna do it. We're gonna dive back in and we're gonna read these books once and for all. And then it'll be over. So here we are, Snowbound-a-Palooza Part 2, The Revenge. The Snow Strikes Back. The Return. I don't know what to call it. All of these books, as was the case with about half the books from Part 1, were found and read on the Internet Archive. I admit I'm still not 100% convinced about the legality of the Internet Archive, but that's a discussion for other people to be having, and I believe they are having it. They have been defending themselves in court recently. So there's that, but that's a separate issue. 7 of these books were just titled Snowbound, which makes it even more egregious that they were left off the original list. And only about half of them, or a little more than half, I should say, were romances. Before we get into the reviews, I do want to say one more thing. I was a little dismayed last time that a few people seem to have gotten the idea that the whole project was a complete waste of time. That is not the case at all, and I'm sorry and disappointed that anyone would have watched that video and gotten that impression. Did I encounter some stinkers? Yes. Did I slog my way through some heaping piles of mediocrity? Yes. Did I get frustrated at times with the quality of the stories? Yes. Was I exhausted and practically out of my mind by the end? Yes. But I also found some really good books that I never would have encountered otherwise. Here's a list of the titles from Part 1 that I'm glad I read because they made the project worthwhile. I should have included this at the end of that video, but I was pretty pooped by that point and forgot all about it. So without further ado, here are my thoughts on the other books I found with Snowbound in the title. So, because I was not totally sold on this whole thing, I began with the 3 shortest books on my list. They were all, I believe they were all children's books, so that was good. It was very encouraging. I read them all in one night, and then I felt like, this is good. I got this. I'm back in the Snowbound game. Woohoo! It went downhill after that, but we had a strong beginning. Book number 1 is Snowbound Secrets by Virginia L. Kroll, illustrated by Nivola Uya. This was published in 2014, it's 36 pages long, and it is a children's picture book. It's about a girl living on a farm in Bhutan in the Himalayas who joins her father and brother on a yak herding trek, gets in trouble in the snow, and is rescued by a yeti. Nice story, very colorful pictures, an interesting and succinct snapshot of a lesser-known pocket of the world and its unique culture, including the mythology of the Yeti, which is rather different from our Western understanding of the abominable snowman. Far more benevolent, for example, than we think of it being. Book rating, 4 out of 5. Snowbound rating, 3 out of 10. I'm sticking with my ratings from Part 1. Books are rated out of 5. Snowbounding is rated out of 10. Still not logical, but at least it's consistent. Book number 2 is titled Snowbound by Dave Morris, illustrated by Click. That's spelled all caps CLIC, exclamation point. I don't know if that's an individual or a group, a team, a company, but that's what it said. This was published in 1990. It's 30 pages long, and it's another picture book in the sense that it's got illustrations, but I would say this one's for second or third grade level readers. Here's what I wrote about this one. So, this is kind of funny. An ambulance delivering a heart for a boy's emergency transplant gets caught in a snowstorm and turns over. That part's not funny. The two drivers despair, but micro machines come to their rescue. And by micro machines, it actually means those miniature toy vehicles, the ones that are about an inch long. I'm pretty sure we still have a bunch of those in a box somewhere in the basement from the 80s. That's when they were really big. I think you can still get them. You can buy packages of them online on eBay. That is not where I thought this was going. I was very surprised when I put two and two together, but it was kind of cool. It would be cooler if I were a little boy who loved playing with cars and trucks to see the toys that I enjoyed playing with featured in a book I was reading. There's an emphasis on problem solving and engineering here, which is good. Encourages kids to think. And think in terms of weight and motion and durability and things like that. Although I do find the solutions nearly impossible to believe. Some of the ways that they defied the laws of physics, I couldn't go that far, but it was entertaining. So I gave the book a rating of 4 out of 5 and a Snowbound rating of 6 out of 10. Book number 3 is Snowbound by Wes Eby. This one was published in 2005. It's 50 pages long, and it is juvenile fiction. This one's a chapter book. Here's what I wrote. When a snowstorm slams the Navajo reservation, a man and his 2 children in Phoenix head up to assist a local church and the community. This one was put out by the Church of the Nazarene, essentially to tell kids about missionary work. The messages are obvious, and unfortunately, the main child character is chirpy and annoying. In a way, it reminded me of Snowbound in Hidden Valley, which I talked about in the first Snowbound video, and I enjoyed that a lot more, perhaps because it didn't talk down to its reader as much. This felt more overtly educational and was meant to be edifying, which isn't a crime. It just made it a little less interesting and more didactic, like I was reading a lesson disguised as an adventure story to a VBS class. On a side note, the archive transfer had some glitches, duplicated pages, missing pages, which made the reading experience a little more challenging, confusing, but that does not reflect on the book itself. So I give the book a rating of 2.5 out of 5, and a Snowbound rating of 6 out of 10, because they do get stranded in a truck overnight, and that's kind of scary. Book number 4 is Snowbound Cinderella by Ruth Langan. This one was published in 2000. It's 244 pages long, and it's a romance! First romance of part 2. And here's what I wrote. What the heck does this have to do with Cinderella? An overseas journalist who's been through trauma and an actress/runaway bride get stuck in a cabin together. And that's pretty much it. They deny their attraction to each other for a day, maybe a day and a half. But once they take the plunge, good grief. The number of times they went at it was kind of ridiculous and boring. So I give the book a 2 out of 5. It would probably have been lower, except they had some real meaningful conversations and they did grow as characters. Snowbound rating, 5 out of 10. Book number 5 is Snowbound Seduction by Helen Brooks. This one was published in 2010. It's 253 pages long, but that's the large print edition, and it's a romance. It's a Christmas romance, and let me tell ya, whenever I was reading this, late April, early May, I really was not in the mood for a Christmas romance. Here's what I wrote. I was going to skip this one completely because I just knew what it would be like, but something the author wrote in her opening letter happened to catch my eye and made me reconsider that maybe this wouldn't be what it was advertising. Well, it kind of is, and it kind of isn't. I could only stomach the first few chapters because I didn't like her or him. I hated how insistent and aggressive he was, and what a pushover she was, and I decided, life's too short for me to go through another book like that Amy Lauren junk that I read in part 1. I think it was called Snowbound Weekend. I did pretty much skim the rest of it, though. I didn't just completely cast it aside. And I was surprised to find out that his planned seduction does not end up being successful, because, spoiler, you're not going to read this. She informs him that she's waiting to give herself to the man she'll spend the rest of her life with, and he is against commitment. But I was also surprised at how far Brooks goes with some of her terminology. It's not explicit, but she definitely uses a few more heated and descriptive phrases than I expect to see in a romance written by someone who introduces herself as a committed Christian. It ends up being kind of contradictory, and the level of spiciness here took me aback. I skimmed all the way to the end, and it didn't end up being totally horrible. The heroine holds her own, the hero changes, they both learn valuable lessons and become better people, etc., etc. Also, holy comma splices. I guess comma splices is kind of a pet peeve of mine, and there were an awful lot here. Could have used some proofreading. So I give the book a 2.5 out of 5, and I give it a Snowbound rating of 3 out of 10. The snowbounding is mostly just a plot device for the second half of the book to make the characters talk to each other more. Book number 6 is Snowbound by Faye Cunningham. This one was published in 2011, it's 186 pages long, and it's a Christmas romance. Here's what I wrote. I picked this one next just because the cover made me snicker. On paper, it does sound somewhat promising. A young woman is hired to assist a famous but moody cosmetic surgeon with his book, finds out he has troubles with rheumatoid arthritis and an irresponsible ex-wife who hogs their kids even though she doesn't like them. The book itself wasn't very good, though. It's harmless, and it's a quick read, but it's pretty flat. The weirdest thing is that it felt like an edited version of a novel. It's like when someone translates Shakespeare and takes out all the interesting, unique words. What's left is basic, unremarkable language that conveys the essentials, but is devoid of the original heart and soul. That's kind of what was going on here. There are words and sentences and characters and plot. Feelings and developments were there, but it moved along without ever making a significant impression or becoming engrossing. It was just kind of colorless. So I gave the book 2.5 or 3 out of 5. There's a little leeway because at least story-wise it was better than rubbish, and I give it a Snowbound rating of 4 out of 10. Book number 7 is a Snowboy. Book number 7 is A Snowbound Cowboy Christmas by Amanda Renee. This one was published in 2017. It's 381 pages long, but that is the large print edition, and it's a Christmas romance. Here's what I wrote about this one. I've got 2 cowboy books on this second list, and I went with this one first because I had a feeling I would like the second one better. So I wanted to save that for later and get this one out of the way. It had its interesting moments, but I ended up kind of bored and checked out for a good deal of it. The relationship between a very pregnant real estate lady from the big city and the owner of a struggling ranch resort in Montana ramped up too quickly, which is a bad sign because then they're going to spend the rest of the book being on again, off again. I find that tedious. There are misunderstandings, characters change their minds on a dime, he's annoyingly stubborn. And there's also an improbable night of passion. So I didn't enjoy this one too much. It did have some humorous banter, though. So I gave it a book rating of 2.5 or 3 out of 5, more likely 2.5, and a Snowbound rating of 1 or 2 out of 10. Early on, she gets stuck at the resort because of a storm, but then she gets stuck there not because of snow, but because of an issue with her pregnancy where she's ordered not to travel. There's hardly any snowbounding at all. Book number 8 is Snowbound by Janice K. Johnson. This was published in 2007, and it's a whopping 281 pages. Not that that's long for a book, but it's kind of long for a Christmas romance. Those, in my experience, I've read quite a few of them by now, they tend to be around 200. So 281, it's like, oh wow, you must have an awful lot to say. Here's what I wrote about this one, and in full disclosure, what I read of it, I did not read attentively. A teacher at an elite boarding school for rich foreign students gets snowed in, along with her group of teenagers, with a scarred and maimed Iraqi war veteran who is now running a ski lodge. Sparks fly between the unlikely couple, but the students are not to be ignored. I got as far as page 80 with this, and then I realized I was not interested at all. It wasn't bad, it wasn't terrible, it wasn't offensive, it was just boring. And I said, you know what? This is my project, it's my call, and I'm not doing this anymore. And I abandoned it at 28%. I guess that was liberating. I don't know. My Snowbound rating would have probably been a 4 out of 10. They're snowed in, they've got to eat random food and be careful to ration it, but the lodge has a generator. Everybody gets to take a hot bath whenever they want to. They're able to cook food. They're fine. At this point, it's midnight. We just crossed over into June 2nd, and at this point, I'm halfway through this list. I feel pretty apathetic about this whole thing. I started out strong, I read those kids' books, and I really liked them, and I was like, I can do this. Maybe I can even do this in 2 or 3 weeks. It's been much longer than that, and I'm tired. I want to read something else. I want to read anything else. Alright, I've got a couple updates here to make things more exciting. It won't really make a difference for you when you're watching this video after I've posted it, but it makes a big difference for me right now, who's living it. Update number 1, I decided a few days ago that, yep, I'm going for it. This is coming out on Saturday, or maybe Sunday, depends on when I finish editing it all together. But, the project ends on Saturday. Today is Tuesday. I have 6 books left, but I think I can make it. I did also find, here's the second update, I just found out about 2 more Snowbound books. Ah! And, okay, I am adding them to my list. That's because one of them is something that should have been on my list already. I don't know what happened. I forgot to add it or something. So I already knew about it, so it belongs on the list. And then I just threw in the other one just for good measure. But after this, no more. I'm drawing the line. I don't care how many more books with Snowbound in the title that the Internet Archive people upload onto their site. I'm not adding any more Snowbound books to my list. I will be done after this. And that's how I'm sticking to it. Book number 9 is Snowbound Reunion by Barbara McMahon. This one was published in 2006, it's 192 pages long, and it's a Christmas romance. Here is what I wrote. After 6 years of marriage to a man who works in journalism overseas and hardly ever makes time to come home, a woman decides this situation just isn't working anymore. She writes a letter saying she wants a divorce, and then leaves it behind while she goes off to clean up a house she's recently inherited. Surprise, surprise! Her husband shows up, and he's read her letter, and he's fuming. The rest of the book is her insisting they don't want the same things anymore, and it's over between them, even though it clearly isn't, and she still secretly loves him, and he's crazy about her, and him trying to convince her she's wrong. The conflict hinges on her new obsession with starting a family and having a baby, and oh man, it would drive me crazy if I were him, the way she just keeps on bringing this up in every single conversation they have. I'm sympathetic to her, absolutely, but also, it's like, lady, you have a one-track mind, and you're really not reading the room here. Clearly, there is something going on with him. So yeah, she was kind of adult. They were both annoying. This one was pretty boring and melancholy. There's a lot of thinking and talking and not much else. The twist, in the moment, I found it kind of surprising, but then as I thought about it, I was like, I thought of this twist before, I just happened to forget. So it doesn't really get much credit for that. It had a couple moments where it was more interesting, but for the most part, it was pretty blah. When I first finished it and wrote these notes, I gave it a rating of 2.5 out of 5. Now that it's been a couple days, I feel like, maybe I should just give it a 2 out of 5, but we'll let the first impression stand. Snowbound rating, 0 out of 10. They were never snowbound. Granted, I wasn't always paying close attention, but I don't think I missed it. Book number 10 is Snowbound Baby by Susan Meyer. This one was published in 2005. It's 184 pages long, and it's a Christmas romance. Here's what I wrote about it. I didn't know, but this also has a cowboy, so we actually have 3 cowboy romances on this list. He is a trucker, but he wears a Stetson and owns a cattle ranch, so that counts as a cowboy in my book. A young woman with a baby and a churlish trucker each find themselves stranded by a snowstorm on the road. Joining forces, they seek shelter in an empty cabin. This one turned out to be not bad. I ended up liking it well enough. The guy is a loner type, and he's pretty inconsiderate, but that's the source of a lot of the conflict. Like many other Snowbound romances, this is basically just about 2 people being stuck inside, becoming attracted to each other, and playing the will they or won't they game. It gets a little PG-13, gets definitely PG-13 at one point, although nothing happens. So this is definitely a variation on a theme that at this point I have seen many, many times, but at least it was interesting and a little funny as well, with the baby stuff and an unexpected stomach bug. That was different. It was so different that I'm tempted to overpraise the book just for throwing something out there that is so out of the ordinary. But what can I say? After reading all of these Christmas romances that almost from page 1 were just kind of bleh, it was really nice to find something that was at least a little bit refreshing. So I give the book 3 out of 5 and a Snowbound rating of 7.5 out of 10. Book number 11 was Snowbound 6 by Richard Martin Stern. This one was published in 1977. It's 230 pages long, and it's a survival book. 6 people get trapped in a cave together on a mountain in New Mexico during a snowstorm, and local search and rescue scrambles to find them in a narrow margin of time before a major avalanche strikes or the second storm arrives on the heel of the first. Richard Martin Stern wrote The Tower, which is one of the 2 books that The Towering Inferno was based on, and it seems he specialized in novels about people trying to survive in disastrous situations. This one did not get optioned for a film adaptation, but it sure reads like it's movie-ready. It's just like a 70s disaster flick, with a lot of characters, a narrative that's moving from one place to another, juggling the different plot threads. It's got the setup, the incident, one obstacle after another, heroics and hubris, and some stupid mistakes. It does have a slow start that casts many of its characters in an unflattering light, but once the whole survival aspect really gets rolling, it improves, and the second half had some gripping, edge-of-your-seat stuff. On the whole, it's not a great work of fiction, but it is a pretty thrilling read. I give it a book rating of 3.5 out of 5. At moments, it was a 4, but that wasn't consistent, and the first chapter, or the first couple chapters, which is where you've really got to pull in your reader, that was kind of bumpy. If I wasn't determined to get through this book for this project, I may have set it aside and said, this isn't working for me, but then I would have missed out on what turned out to be a decent book, a pretty good book. So it's more like a 3.5 or 3.75. But its Snowbound rating is 9 out of 10. The next two are the late additions that I accidentally overlooked when I first made this list. Book 12 is Snowbound. It is a Wild Thornberrys tie-in written by Kiki Thorpe, illustrated by Mel Grant. It was published in 2000. It's 36 pages long, and it's a picture book that is a tie-in to the Nickelodeon TV show. I vaguely recall this show being on TV, but I never saw more than a few minutes of it here and there. I didn't watch much kids' television anyway, but on the rare occasions when I was home alone and in control of the remote, it was not something I chose to watch. The animation style and the characters didn't appeal to me, and I was probably above its target audience. So, a Wild Thornberrys Snowbound book has no special nostalgic appeal for me. Anyway, while her family is exploring in the Himalayas, Eliza, who I guess is the main character, brings her friend, or maybe he's a pet, I don't know, Darwin, a talking chimpanzee, on a quest to find a rare and endangered snow leopard. Eliza gets caught in a random storm, and the elusive snow leopard, who has been following her, and who can also talk, reveals itself and helps her. This turned out to be very like book number 1, Snowbound Secrets by Virginia Kroll, except I didn't think it was as good. Not that Snowbound Secrets knocked my socks off, but this one, which has a lot in common story-wise, didn't have as much depth, it wasn't as poetic, and the illustrations weren't as rich. Now maybe if I were a kid and I was a fan of the show, it would be different, but as it is, I found it weak and forgettable. So I've got to give it 2 out of 5 stars, with a Snowbound rating of 1 out of 10. The girl gets a little lost in a squall, not a snowstorm, she's never snowbound, and the whole thing's over very quickly. Book number 13 is Snowbound Bride by Kathy Gillan Thacker. This one was published in 1997. It's 246 pages long, and it's a romance, but not a Christmas romance, which is a nice break. Really not feeling Christmas in early June. A runaway bride whose zipper is stuck on her wedding dress encounters a small-town sheriff while she's on the lam. Mutual attraction is instantaneous, but while his matchmaking grandparents welcome her into their community and their home with open arms, he is suspicious of what she's really doing there. Since I've only got a few days left on this project, I was fully prepared to blitz through this one, especially when the first few pages had a hokey vibe, and it's not like the cover art was promising. But then it got much better. And I did kind of blitz through it after all, but in the sense that I was enjoying it so much that I happily devoured it in one night, not that I was speeding through it to get it done and cross it off my list. This one was funny and entertaining and sexy, but not too sexy for my taste, with side characters that actually matter, character development, and a plot that extends beyond two people with baggage being attracted to each other while being stuck inside for a day. It's amazing! I was not expecting this to have so much substance, so that was a very pleasant surprise, and the content is different from anything else on this list or on the first video's list. The characters do make their share of poor decisions, which is aggravating, but it's part of the story. So I had a good time with this one, and I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. Maybe if I was just reading it on its own and there weren't all these other subpar books that came before it, I would not be so generous, but That's the situation. And I give it a Snowbound rating of 6.5 or 7 out of 10. The loss of power and phone lines here is pivotal, and there's actually a double snowbounding, which gives it an extra point or two. Book number 14 is Snowbound by Marlene E. McFadden. This one was published in 2001, although it looks and sounds older than that, and it's only 125 pages long. All along, I have been excited about this one because it's a true wild card. I had no idea what it was going to be. The cover art doesn't give you any hints, and Goodreads had almost zero information about it, so I was going in completely cold. It turns out to be an English mystery in which a young woman wakes in the hospital to find she's been in a car accident with her sister and lost her memory. I can't believe it took me this long to come across an amnesia plotline. This one's a very quick, light read. As mysteries go, it's not deep. What was going on seemed somewhat obvious, and the protagonist is slow on the uptake. The relative simplicity of the writing style doesn't add any complexity. I definitely think it could have been styled a little better to increase the sense of mystery, or at least give a little more atmosphere. But the first half was sufficiently intriguing. It felt like a psychological thriller, something that might have been adapted into a TV movie in the 70s, perhaps. The second half was more dramatic and less interesting, and then it reached a resolution that I found dubious. I liked the book well enough, though. It was engaging, it was certainly fast, it had romance, but it was secondary, and the mystery was a nice surprise. Not the mystery itself, but the fact that there was a mystery. So I give it 3 out of 5 stars. Snowbound rating, 1 out of 10. I don't know why the author chose to call it Snowbound. It's a stretch, it's inaccurate, it's barely relevant to the plot. There are other titles out there that would fit better. Book number 15 is The Mavericks Snowbound Christmas by Karen Rose Smith. This one was published in 2017. It's 218 pages long, and it's a Christmas romance. It's also a cowboy romance. This is the other cowboy book. A rancher with a pregnant wild horse he's been taming needs help from a local veterinarian when the pregnancy seems to be having complications. While the two of them attend to the horse, a storm brews outside, and of course, they get snowbound in the barn together all night. For no reason in particular, I was kind of looking forward to this one. I don't know, the long title, the picture on the front, it just seemed like maybe it would be different. But it didn't do much for me. It wasn't horrible, it was just okay. I can't complain about there not being enough characters this time, but it went too far in the other direction. So many people show up, so many names are dropped, so many couples are alluded to and discussed. It's obvious the book is part of a series where each novel focuses on a different member of the family or the community or whatever it is, and previous or future protagonists make cameo appearances. I've encountered this several times while doing this project, but for the most part it hasn't been that distracting. Usually the author does a better job weaving in the cameos. This was a bit much. So I reiterate that the book wasn't bad, it just wasn't especially good. It didn't really pull me in. I wasn't that interested in the characters or the scenario or the romance. So I give it a book rating of 2.5 or 3 out of 5. It probably merits a 3, but I'm not that enthusiastic, and I give it a Snowbound rating of 3.5 or 4 out of 10. I got 2 books left. This is Thursday evening. I have 2 books, and I intend to get those read by Saturday afternoon. Book number 16 is Snowbound with an Heiress by Jennifer Fay. This one was published in 2017. It's 186 pages long, and it's a Christmas romance. And Jennifer Fay wrote one of the books that was included in Part 1, Snowbound with the Soldier, which I liked. I gave it a 50% chance that this one would actually feature a cute puppy, and good news, it did. Not the same breed, but close enough, and the puppy is heavily involved in the story. It's the title that's kind of misleading. This one is about a movie star who has escaped from Hollywood and is hiding out in the Austrian Alps when she winds up rescuing a popular morning news anchor from a car accident. She recognizes him as her longtime celebrity crush, but because she is disguised, he has no idea who she is, and she's determined to keep it that way. The premise here is shockingly similar to that of Snowbound Cinderella, which was book number 4. A runaway starlet with relationship woes, hounded by the paparazzi, gets snowed in with a member of the press. Thankfully, I enjoyed this one more, at least in the first half. I really liked the first half, and then I don't know what happened. It's like there was a switch. I suddenly lost interest. The characters' interactions started to bug me, and all at once I was eager for it to be over. It was weird. It's like I was reading 2 different books. Not that it was great to begin with. The writing is fine, but the author has a tendency to state the obvious rather than trusting the reader's intuition and ability to read between the lines. Unfortunately, I find that with a lot of these romance books, the first half was a 4, the second half was a 3, so for my book rating, I'm giving it a 3.5. The Snowbound rating is a 5.5 out of 10. They get 3 feet of snow dumped on them, and that is some significant snowfall. I was very glad to see it. Some of these writers have a weak idea of what constitutes a serious snowbounding blizzard. And I know what you consider serious snowfall varies based on where you are from and what your local government is used to handling. A few inches of snow can really gum up the works for a couple of days. Other parts of the world, other parts of the country, a few inches of snow is nothing. A couple feet of snow is like, just another winter. So that's been kind of an interesting thing to observe with all of these books, what they view as serious snowfall. Okay, I've got 1 book left, and I'm already 40 pages into it, so I think we're in good shape. And book number 17 is Snowbound by Logan Winters. This was published in 2014. It's 160 pages long, and it's a western, but not a cowboy romance. When I did my initial search on the Internet Archive back in December to see how many books they had titled Snowbound, this one stood out to me. So when I got through my first list without having read it, I was confused. I think that's why I ran another search on the archive to figure out if it had disappeared. But no, it hadn't disappeared, it was just dumb human error. When I created the second list, this one was at the top, and naturally, I saved it for last. I'm not sure if I've ever read a straight-up Western novel like this before, one with outlaws and shootouts and vigilante justice, so this was a fresh experience. It's a thriller in which a tracker is on the trail of a couple thieves who have made off with a rich man's money and his 2 pretty daughters, and I liked it. It's well written with some really good descriptions. It's got a quick pace and a couple funny one-liners from the hero. It's light. It's got some excitement. I did get a little bored in the middle, and around that point I was thinking this would be better as a movie than a book, but it picked up again, and I wound up pretty pleased to have this as my final Snowbound book. I give it a solid 3 stars and a Snowbound rating of 5.5 out of 10. It gets a little extra credit for having a double snowbounding. And now I'm done. For real this time. For all the huffing and puffing I did, this wasn't actually too bad. It would have been easier if I had determined my deadline from the start, but forcing myself to read 9 books in 1 week made it much more intense. I like to live dangerously. We did have a couple clunkers. I think that's to be expected when you just read a whole bunch of random books. But nothing was too painful, and I found several satisfying titles. Not as many as there were in Part 1, but I also read half as many books. I want to thank you for joining me once again on my Snowbound reading journey. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you'll stay tuned, not for a Part 3, definitely no Part 3, but for a return to movie reviews next week. Thanks for watching.